Hello everyone, hope you have a nice evening. Today we come to the final part of the Deep Work book, rule number 4. Get eliminated things. If you haven't heard the previous parts, you can stop by the channel to listen, it's very interesting. And now let's start. Worth of time. So they made this change permanent. Every year, from May to October, 37 Signals employees only work from Monday to Thursday, except for the customer support team, which still works throughout the week. According to co-founder Jason Fried, who shared the decision in a blog post, people should enjoy the summer weather. Not long after, chatter began to emerge in the media. A few months after Fried announced the company's permanent 4-day workweek policy, journalist Tara Weiss wrote a significant article in Forbes titled, "Why the 4-day workweek Doesn't Work." She summarized her argument against the strategy as follows. Condensing 40 hours of work into 4 days may not necessarily be an efficient way of working. Many people already find that working 8 hours a day is exhausting. Now you're forcing them to add 2 extra hours each day. This can lead to burnout and reduced productivity. Fried quickly responded. In a blog post titled, "Forbes Misses the Point of the 4-Day Work Week," he began by agreeing with Weiss's hypothesis that compressing 40 hours into 4 days might cause stress for workers. But he also clarified that this was not his idea. He wrote, "The point of the 4-day workweek is to do fewer things," Fried explained. "It's not about working 10-hour days for 4 days, but about working the same 8 hours per day, just in 4 days." At first, this might seem confusing. Fried had previously stated that his employees were accomplishing a full week's worth of work in just 4 days. But now, he was claiming they were working fewer hours. How can both of these statements be true? It turns out the difference lies in the role of shallow work. Fried went on to say, "Very few people actually work a full 8 hours a day. Despite meetings, interruptions, web surfing, office politics, and personal matters that often creep into a typical workday, you're lucky if you get just a few hours of focused work. Reducing formal working hours helps tighten up the excess time in a typical workweek. When people don't have as much time to finish their work, they value the time they do have more. They learn to use it wisely, and that's a good thing. They won't waste time on things that don't matter. When you have less time, you tend to use it more wisely." In other words, 37 Signals cutting back on working hours during the week eliminated shallow work, allowing employees to focus on deeper, more meaningful tasks. The so-called urgent tasks that often mask shallow work turned out to be unnecessary distractions. This experiment also prompted a natural question: what would happen if 37 Signals took it a step further? If eliminating shallow work didn't significantly impact outcomes, what would happen if they not only eliminated shallow tasks but also replaced the recovered time with more focused, deep work? Fortunately, our curiosity was answered when the company soon put this bold idea to the test. Fried has always been interested in the policies of tech companies like Google, which allow employees to dedicate 20% of their time to work on personal projects. While he liked this idea, he also felt that removing just 1 day from each busy workweek wasn't enough to support the type of deep, uninterrupted work that could lead to true breakthroughs. He explained, "I'd rather have 5 consecutive days than 5 days spread out over 5 weeks. The idea is that we'll achieve better results when people have a longer stretch of time to work without interruption." To test this hypothesis, 37 Signals took a bold step. The company gave its employees the entire month of June off to focus on their personal projects. This would be a time free of any superficial work obligations, no check-in meetings, no memos, and thankfully, no PowerPoint presentations. At the end of the month, the company would hold an idea pitch day for employees to share the ideas they had been working on. Summing up the experiment in an article for Inc., Fried considered it a success. The Idea Pitch Day resulted in 2 projects that were soon put into action: a better set of tools for handling customer support, and a data visualization system that helped the company better understand how their customers were using their product. These projects were predicted to bring significant value to the company, but they almost certainly wouldn't have come to fruition if the company hadn't given its employees the time and space for deep, focused work. To truly unleash their potential, they needed hours of uninterrupted effort. How could we shut down the company for an entire month to drown in new ideas? Fried asked. Why not? The 37 Signals experiment highlights an important reality. Shallow work is increasingly taking up the time and attention of knowledge workers, even though it often has little immediate importance. For most companies, if they eliminated a significant amount of this trivial work, the results would be unaffected. And as Jason Fried discovered, if companies not only eliminate shallow work but also replace it with more focused, deep work, they won't just keep going. They could become more successful. This rule asks you to apply these insights to your own work life. The following strategies are designed to help you identify shallow tasks in your current schedule and then cut them down to a minimum, so you can devote more time to deep, focused work on what matters most. However, before diving into these strategies, we must face the reality that the anti-shallow work mindset has its limitations. The value of deep work far exceeds the value of shallow work, but that doesn't mean you should pursue a schedule where every moment is spent in deep focus. Sometimes you do need some shallow tasks to keep your deep work on track. You might avoid checking your email every 10 minutes, but you can't ignore important emails altogether. In this sense, the goal of this rule is to minimize shallow tasks, not to eliminate them completely from your schedule. This is a matter of cognitive capacity. Deep work is exhausting because it forces you to give your full effort. Performance psychologists have extensively studied how much effort an individual needs to maintain focus and alertness throughout a given day. In a paper on deliberate practice, Anders Ericsson and his colleagues reviewed these studies. They noted that for beginners, such as a child in the early stages of skill development, 1 hour per day is a reasonable limit. For those accustomed to high levels of activity, the limit can extend up to 4 hours, but going beyond that is rare. The studies I'm citing focus on the concept of deliberate practice, essentially, though not entirely, overlapping with our definition of deep work. For our purposes, deliberate practice is an effective alternative to the general category of cognitive tasks, with deep work being one example within it. T.g. This means that once you've reached your deep work limit for a particular day, performance will gradually decline if you try to cram in more work. As a result, shallow work doesn't pose a danger until you overreach by attempting more deep work after you're already overwhelmed. At first, this warning might seem optimistic. A typical workday lasts 8 hours, and a deep worker can only spend a maximum of 4 hours in a truly focused state. After that, you could comfortably spend the rest of the day engaging in shallow tasks without worrying about negative impacts. This analysis, however, overlooks the risk that a large amount of time is easily consumed, especially when considering the impact of meetings, appointments, calls, and other scheduled events. For many jobs, this shallow time can leave you with surprisingly little time left for deep work. For example, in my own work as a professor, I am less affected by such commitments, but they still take up a significant amount of my time, especially during the academic year. Take a random day from my schedule in the previous semester. I'm writing this during a quiet summer month. I had a meeting from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., another meeting from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m., and a class from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. In this 8-hour workday, I've already lost 4 hours. Even if I strictly limit shallow work, email, tasks, to half an hour, I'm still far from the 4 hours of deep work per day that I aim for. In other words, while we may not be able to spend the whole day in deep focus, this fact does not diminish the urgency of cutting back on shallow tasks, because the typical workday for knowledge workers is often far more fragmented than people realize. In conclusion, I advise you to carefully reconsider shallow tasks because their impact is often underestimated, while their importance is often overestimated. You can't completely avoid them, but you must moderate them so they don't hinder your ability to maximize the deep work that should dominate your focus. The following strategies will help you address this reality. Plan for every minute of your day. If you're between the ages of 25 and 34 and live in the UK, you might be watching too much television. In 2013, the UK television licensing agency surveyed TV viewers about their habits. People in the 25 to 34 age group estimated that they spent about 15 to 16 hours per week watching TV. While this figure seemed high, it was actually still inaccurate. We know this because when it comes to TV watching habits, a truth has been revealed. The Audience Research Board of the UK, equivalent to Nielsen in the US, installed meters in sample households to record the exact time spent watching TV. It turns out that people in the 25 to 34 age group thought they watched 15 hours a week, but the reality was that they actually spent about 28 hours in front of the TV screen. It's not just the British who make disproportionate estimates about how much time they spend watching TV. When examining various groups' self-estimates of different behaviors, these gaps are consistently present. In an article for the Wall Street Journal on this topic, business author Laura Vanderkam pointed out several similar examples. A survey by the National Sleep Foundation revealed that Americans believe they sleep an average of about 7 hours per night. But the American Time Use Survey, which asked people to track their actual sleep, reported an average of 8.6 hours. Another study found that people who claimed to work 60 to 64 hours per week were actually working just over 44 hours, while those who claimed to work more than 75 hours were only working just under 55 hours. These examples highlight an important point. We often spend much of our day in a state of disconnection, not mindfully thinking about what we're doing in the moment. This is a problem. Preventing shallow work from sneaking into your schedule is difficult if you don't face your current balance between deep and shallow work head-on, and then form the habit of pausing before acting and asking yourself, what is most meaningful for me right now? The strategies described in the following sections will help you put these behaviors into practice. At first, this may seem like an extreme idea, but it will soon prove its value in helping you make the most of your ability to engage in deep work by planning every minute of your day. Here's my suggestion. At the start of each workday, open a fresh page in your notebook to begin planning. On the left side of the page, list the hours of your workday, in order, covering all the hours you intend to work. Here comes the important part. Break your work hours into blocks and note down the tasks for each block. For example, you may have a block from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. to write a press release for a client. To do this, draw a box around this time, then write press release inside the box. Not every block needs to have a specific task. You might have blocks for lunch or relaxation. To be clear, the minimum length of a block should be 30 minutes. This means that instead of having a small block for each tiny task, e.g., reply to boss's email, submit reimbursement form, ask Carl about the report, you can group similar tasks into broader work blocks. In this case, you might draw a line from the task block to the right side of the page to list all the small tasks you plan to accomplish within that block. When planning your day, you should not leave any minute unaccounted for. Every minute of your workday should be dedicated to a task. Now let this schedule guide you through your workday. Of course, most people will start to encounter problems here. There are two potential, and very likely, issues that may derail your schedule as the day unfolds. The first is miscalculation. For example, you may estimate that writing a press release will take 2 hours, but it actually takes 2.5 hours. The second issue is interruptions, with new tasks suddenly appearing. These events will cause your schedule to fall apart. That's okay. If your schedule is interrupted, you should take a few minutes right afterward to revise the remaining time for the day. You can switch to a new page, or simply erase and redraw the blocks. Or, as I do, skip over the blocks for the rest of the day and create new blocks to the right of the old ones on the page. I usually draw narrow blocks to leave space for revisions. On some days, you may need to adjust your schedule 5 to 6 times. Don't be discouraged if this happens. Your goal is not to stick rigidly to a schedule at all costs. Rather, it is to be as mindful as possible about what you're doing with your time, even if it means making this decision multiple times. Here is the English translation of the text you provided. If you find that constantly revising your schedule makes you feel overwhelmed, I will suggest a few strategies to help bring more stability. First, you should recognize that it's almost certain that you will always underestimate the amount of time needed for most tasks. When starting this habit, we tend to use our schedules as a simulation of ideal tasks, an optimal scenario for a day. Over time, try to predict the required time for tasks as accurately as possible, or at least cautiously. The second helpful strategy is to use buffer blocks. If you're unsure how long a specific task will take to complete, set aside an estimated block of time, and then add an additional frame for division, either for this task or another. If more time is needed for the task, use this extra block to continue working on it. However, if you finish the task on time, use the block for another activity, such as a less urgent task. This allows unexpected events during the day to not force you to change your written schedule. For example, if you schedule 2 hours to write a press release, but then add an extra hour as a buffer, you can continue writing the release if needed. Otherwise, you can use that extra time for tasks like checking emails. The third strategy is to remain flexible with how you use task blocks. Implement multiple task blocks throughout the day, allowing for longer than necessary periods to ensure that tasks planned for the morning are completed. A lot of unexpected things can happen during a typical day for a knowledge worker. Always be prepared with blocks of time to address these surprises and keep everything running smoothly. Before you apply this strategy in practice, I should address a common issue. From my experience, when introducing the value of daily scheduling, I find that many people worry that this type of planning will severely restrict them. The following is a comment from a reader named Joseph under a blog post I wrote on this topic. I think you've underestimated the role of uncertainty. I fear that readers may take these observations too seriously, to the point of obsessing over them, unhealthily, in their schedules, which might exaggerate the importance of scheduling every minute versus missing out on activities. If we're talking about artists, this is often the only truly reasonable action. I understand these concerns, and Joseph is certainly not the first to have such thoughts. Fortunately, these concerns are easy to address. In my daily planning habits, aside from regularly allocating blocks of time for reflective thinking and discussion, I also set the rule that if something important comes up, it's perfectly legitimate to disregard the rest of the daily schedule, of course, except for non-negotiable tasks. I will then devote my full energy to this important, unexpected matter until it's no longer a concern. At that point, I will rearrange my schedule for the remaining part of the day. In other words, I not only allow but also encourage spontaneity within my schedule. Joseph's criticism stems from the mistaken belief that a schedule is meant to force you to stick rigidly to a plan. However, scheduling is not about being restrictive but being thoughtful. It's simply a habit that forces you to consistently take a moment throughout the day to ask yourself, what's the most important thing I should focus on with the time left today? It's this habit of asking questions, not the exactness of the answers, that leads to results. I'll continue to argue that people who know how to combine comprehensive planning with a willingness to adapt or revise their plans when necessary will typically have more creative vision than those who are spontaneous, with their traditional, open-ended daily schedules. Without a plan, you are more likely to waste time on trivial matters such as emails, social media, and browsing the web. While this type of superficial behavior may give you a brief sense of satisfaction, in the long run, it stifles creativity. On the other hand, with a well-thought-out plan, you'll frequently carve out blocks of time to capture new ideas, focus intensely on challenging issues, or engage in deep thought for a set period. This type of commitment can foster innovation. For example, remember the discussion in Rule Number 1 about the strict rituals of many great creative thinkers. And since you are always ready to abandon your plan when a breakthrough idea suddenly arises, you fall into the group of people who are adaptable with their schedules. In conclusion, this strategy forces you to recognize that deep work habits require you to respect your time. To do this, the first step is to decide in advance what you will do with every minute of your working day. Initially, you may find this idea difficult to implement because it's much easier to let both your rational and emotional states control your schedule. However, you must overcome skepticism about this ability to plan if you want to unlock your true potential as a creator of important things. Here is the English translation of the text you provided. Quantifying the depth of each activity. One advantage of scheduling your day is that you can get a clear sense of how much time you're actually spending on less important activities. However, separating this time from your schedule is often difficult because not all tasks are easy to categorize in terms of importance. To tackle this challenge, let's start by recalling the official definition of shallow, unimportant work that I mentioned in the introduction. Shallow, unimportant work. These are supportive tasks that do not require much focus and are often done while distracted. They usually don't create much new value and are easily replicable. Some activities clearly meet the criteria in this definition. For example, checking email or scheduling a conference call are, by nature, easy and relatively unimportant tasks. But other activities may be harder to classify. Let's consider the following examples. Example 1. Editing a draft of a paper that you and a colleague need to submit to a journal soon. Example 2. Creating a PowerPoint presentation for the sales report for this quarter. Example 3. Attending a meeting to discuss the status of an important project and agree on next steps. Clearly, at first glance, categorizing these examples is not easy. The first two examples describe tasks that require a high level of skill, and the third example seems important to advancing a key work objective. This strategy provides you with a precise measure to clear up ambiguity, offering a clear and consistent method for making decisions on the important scale of certain tasks. To do this, you need to evaluate the activities by asking one simple question, which, surprisingly, will clarify the issue. How long, in months, would it take to train a smart, recently graduated college student with no specialized training in my field to complete this task? To illustrate how this approach works, let's apply this question to our ambiguous tasks examples. Example 1 Analysis. To edit a paper accurately, you need to understand the nuances of the work itself, so that you can ensure the task is described correctly, and the broader literary context, to ensure it's cited properly. These requirements demand up-to-date knowledge in an academic field, a specialized task that requires years of diligent study at the undergraduate level and accumulated experience. When it comes to this example, the answer to our question is quite long. It would likely take between 50 to 75 months. Example 2 Analysis. To create a PowerPoint presentation detailing quarterly sales, you need 3 things. First, knowledge of how to make presentations using PowerPoint. Second, understanding the standard format for effective quarterly presentations in your organization. And third, a grasp of what the sales figures represent according to the organization's criteria and how to turn them into reasonable charts. We can assume that the recent graduate from the previous example already knows how to use PowerPoint and is learning the standard formatting for your organization's presentations. This task would likely take no more than a week. Therefore, the real question is how quickly a sharp, recent graduate can understand the data you're tracking, figure out where to find the results, and how to process and convert them into the appropriate graphs and charts for the PowerPoint. This is not a light task, but for a bright graduate, it wouldn't take more than a month to train. Thus, we can give this task an answer of 2 months. Example 3 Analysis. Meetings can be a fairly complex topic to analyze. Sometimes they seem tedious but often play a crucial role in the most important activities of an organization. The method presented here will help address this issue. How long would it take to train a smart, recently graduated college student to replace you in a planning meeting? They would need to understand the project well enough to know the key milestones and the skills of the participants. This student also needs good communication skills and an understanding of how people are executing the project. At this point, you might wonder whether the student needs in-depth expertise in the subject matter of the project. For a planning meeting, probably not. Such meetings rarely delve deeply into content and often focus more on peripheral discussions or giving the impression that participants are very engaged. Let's give this student 3 months to learn enough to replace you in such meetings without any issues. Therefore, the answer to our question here is 3 months. Here is the English translation of the text you provided. Asking your boss about time allocations for shallow tasks. This is an important question, though it's rarely asked. How much time should I spend on non-specialized tasks? This strategy advises you to ask this very question. In other words, if you're an employee, have this conversation with your boss. First, you'll need to find out what they consider shallow versus specialized work. If you're in a leadership position, ask yourself this question. In either case, provide a specific answer. Then, and this is the crucial part, stick to this time allocation. The strategies outlined before and after this one will help you achieve this goal. For most knowledge workers engaged in tasks that don't require significant input evaluation, the answer to this question will likely fall between 30% and 50%. You'll feel uncomfortable spending the majority of your time on tasks that don't require special skills, so 50% is the upper natural limit. Meanwhile, most bosses will start to worry if this figure is significantly lower than 30%, because if you go too low, you risk becoming a hermit, lost in big ideas but never answering emails. Sticking to this time allocation may force you to change your behavior. You'll almost certainly need to turn down projects that seem less important and significantly reduce the amount of shallow work in your current projects. This time allocation may lead you to stop holding weekly status meetings to report on outcome direction. Let me know when you make significant progress, and then we'll talk. It may also encourage you to spend more of your mornings away from communication tasks or reevaluate the importance of quickly responding to every email in your inbox. These changes are positive because they refocus your work on deep concentration. On one hand, they don't force you to abandon core shallow obligations, a move that could create many issues and frustrations, so you can still spend time on those tasks. On the other hand, they force you to set a clear limit on how much non-urgent work is allowed to appear in your schedule. This limit will free up space for more consistent deep work efforts. These decisions should begin with a discussion with your boss, as this agreement will create tacit support for you at work. If you're an employee, this strategy gives you a reason to decline a commitment or reorganize a project to minimize shallow work. You can justify this move by explaining that you need to achieve a balanced goal regarding the types of work as described. As I discussed in Chapter 2, one reason shallow work still dominates knowledge work is that we rarely see its cumulative impact on our schedule. Instead, we tend to assess each individual task, and they all seem quite reasonable and convenient. However, the tools presented earlier in this rule will help you uncover this impact. Now you can confidently tell your boss, "This is how much time I spent on non-essential tasks last week," and make them acknowledge that figure. Confronting these numbers and the economic reality they reveal, for example, it's wasteful to pay a highly skilled professional to spend 30 hours a week on emails and meetings, will lead your boss to realize that you need to say no to certain tasks and reorganize others, even if this causes inconvenience to your boss, yourself, or your colleagues. Of course, this is because the ultimate goal of the business is to create value, not to make life as easy as possible for its employees. Here's the English translation of your provided text. If you're self-employed, this exercise will force you to face the reality that very little time in your busy schedule is actually creating value. These numbers will help you confidently reduce the non-valuable activities that are wasting your time. Without these numbers, an entrepreneur might struggle to say no to any opportunity that could produce some positive result. You might tell yourself, "I have to use Twitter. I must be active on Facebook. I need to fine-tune the features on my blog." Because when you consider each of these tasks individually, saying no to any of them seems to label you as lazy. Rather than rigidly following a fixed ratio of shallow versus deep work, you can eliminate this uncritical acceptance driven by guilt by adopting a healthier habit, making an intentional choice to spend a small portion of your time on shallow tasks, but always leaving the majority of your attention and time for focused, deep work that will drive the development of your business. Of course, when you ask this question, you might receive a rigid answer. No boss will flatly say, "You should spend all your time on shallow tasks." Unless you're new to the field, in which case, you may want to delay this exercise until you've gained enough expertise to add deep work to your official responsibilities. Instead, they might give a lengthy response such as, "We need you to complete this amount of non-valuable work right now." In such cases, the response is still helpful, as it indicates that the task in question does not support specialized work. It also makes clear that a job like this cannot help you succeed in today's information economy. You should thank your boss for their feedback and then quickly move on to a new project that will bring greater value. Completing work before 5:30 p.m. 7 days before I started writing these lines, I participated in 65 separate email exchanges. Of these 65, I sent exactly 5 emails after 5:30 p.m. These numbers reveal something important. I almost never send emails after 5:30 p.m., with a few exceptions. But based on the close relationship between email and work, this behavior suggests a surprising truth. I don't work after 5:30 p.m. I call this commitment fixed schedule productivity, because I've set a clear goal of not working beyond a specific time, and then worked backward to find performance strategies that allow me to meet this declaration. I've been practicing fixed schedule productivity joyfully for over half a decade, and I've worked hard to create high-performance professional work based on my deep focus capabilities. In the following pages, I'll show you how to apply this strategy. Let me introduce the fixed schedule productivity strategy by noting that it's often said that this approach fails in academia. Professors, especially renowned ones, often maintain grueling schedules that extend late into the night and over weekends. For instance, consider a blog post by a young computer science professor I'll call Tom. In a post from winter 2014, he outlined his 12-hour office day, which included 5 different meetings and 3 hours spent on administrative tasks, including emailing, filling out paperwork, organizing meeting notes, planning upcoming meetings. According to his estimate, he only spent about an hour and a half of his 12-hour office day doing real work, tasks he defined as efforts to complete a piece of research. It's no surprise that Tom had to work outside his standard workday. He concluded in another post, "I have to accept working on weekends. What professor escapes this? However, I can. Although I don't work late and rarely work on weekends since moving to Georgetown in the fall of 2011 and starting this chapter in the fall of 2014, I've published about 20 peer-reviewed papers. I've also won 2 competitive grants, published a book, unrelated to academia, and am about to finish another book, the one you're holding in your hands right now. I've achieved all of this while many other Toms in society are struggling with hectic, pressure-filled schedules. How is this paradox explained? We can find an intriguing answer in a famous article by Radhika Nagpal, a computer science professor at Harvard University. Nagpal begins her article by stating that many professors put unnecessary stress on themselves. The misconceptions and scary numbers that surround a professor's life when they're tenured at an R1, research-focused university. Before explaining how she eventually decided to step away from what people typically say, and instead did specific things intentionally to preserve her happiness. This deliberate effort allowed Nagpal to enjoy her pre-tenure years in an extraordinary way. Nagpal provided some detailed examples of these efforts, and there's one specific tactic that might sound familiar. Nagpal acknowledges that early in her research career, she found herself trying to cram work into every free moment between 7 a.m. and midnight. Because she had young children, especially in the evenings, her time was fragmented with various tasks, making it hard to stay focused. Not long after, she realized that this strategy wasn't working, So she set a boundary of working 50 hours per week and established the necessary rules and routines to make this commitment possible. In other words, Nagpal implemented a fixed schedule productivity strategy. We know that this strategy didn't negatively impact Nagpal's academic research career, because she eventually became a tenured professor and was promoted to full professor after 3 years of dedication, an impressive breakthrough. How did she achieve this? According to her article, one of the main techniques that helped her stick to her time limits was imposing clear quotas on shallow tasks in her academic work. For instance, she decided she would only take 5 business trips per year for any purpose, as these trips could generate a lot of shallow work, from booking accommodations to writing presentations. 5 trips per year may sound like a lot, but for professors, it's actually quite small. To emphasize this point, consider that Matt Welsh, a former colleague of Nagpal in the computer science department at Harvard, who now works at Google, once wrote a blog post stating that it's common for professors to travel 12 to 24 times a year. Imagine how much shallow work Nagpal could avoid by cutting out about 15 trips from her schedule. Limiting business trips was just one of many strategies Nagpal used to control her workday. For example, she also set a limit on the number of papers she would review each year. But the common thread among all these strategies was a commitment to minimizing shallow tasks in order to protect deep work, the research that made her reputation in her field. Returning to my own example, a similar commitment has helped me succeed with my fixed schedule. I am also very cautious about using the word yes/agree, which is one of the most dangerous words in a person's productivity vocabulary. I often spend a lot of time considering whether to agree to something that isn't truly specialized. If you asked me to participate in something non-essential at the university, I might reply with a phrase I learned from a department chair. Let's talk after I've been officially appointed. Another effective tactic is to clearly decline but offer an ambiguous explanation for the refusal. You should avoid giving a clear reason for the refusal that gives the requester an opportunity to soothe it. For example, if I decline an invitation to speak at a time-consuming event by saying I have other trips scheduled during that period, I won't go into detail, which would allow the requester to suggest ways to squeeze their event into my busy schedule. Instead, I simply say, "Your event sounds interesting, but I'm sorry, I have to decline because I have a scheduling conflict." When turning down tasks, I also try not to offer an alternative, which could end up consuming more time in my schedule. For example, "I'm sorry I can't join your committee, but I can look over some overall proposals and share my thoughts." A clean-cut refusal is usually the best option. In addition to protecting my tasks, I also manage my time very carefully. Since time is finite, I can't spread myself too thin or waste entire mornings on trivial tasks without first planning intelligently. Careful planning, while being ready to discard the plan if something more important arises, combined with the fixed schedule productivity strategy, has allowed me to maintain agility in my organization. Without this boundary, I would surely let my habits take over. In conclusion, both Nagpal and I have been able to succeed in academic careers without becoming overloaded like Tom because of 2 reasons. First, we don't confuse ourselves with an overwhelming commitment to a rigid schedule. By minimizing shallow work and focusing on deep work, this strategy frees up our time without reducing the amount of value we create. Indeed, I believe that minimizing shallow tasks allows us to free up more energy for deep work, enabling us to achieve more than if we simply adhered to a packed schedule. Second, with limited time, we have to think more carefully about our organizational habits to create more value than a longer but poorly organized schedule ever could. Here is the English translation for the provided text. This strategy asserts that these benefits remain the same across all areas of intellectual labor. Even if you're not a professor, a fixed schedule productivity strategy can bring enormous benefits. In most intellectual jobs, rejecting a non-deep task might seem harmless in isolation, but it is actually quite difficult in the moment. You might accept an invitation for coffee or agree to join a call. Suddenly, any obligation outside of deep efforts becomes suspect, and is seen as potentially troublesome. Your default response at that moment is no, and your threshold for time and attention rises significantly, allowing you to navigate through these distractions more effectively. This also forces you to test the assumptions about your company's work culture, which you may have thought to be rigid but turns out to be quite flexible. For example, receiving an email from your boss after working hours is common. But a fixed schedule productivity strategy would have you ignore these emails until the next morning. Many people think this will cause issues because the boss will expect a response, but in many cases, the fact that your boss sent the email late at night does not mean they expect an immediate reply, a lesson that this strategy will soon help you uncover. In other words, fixed schedule productivity is a super habit that is easy to apply but has a far-reaching impact. If you could only choose one behavior to refocus your attention on deep work, this should be at the top of the list. However, if you're still unsure about the idea that setting temporary boundaries during your workday could lead to more success, I encourage you once again to look at Radhika Nagpal's career, who strongly advocates for a fixed schedule. Coincidentally, just as Tom was complaining online about the overwhelming workload that seems inevitable in the position of a young professor, Nagpal was celebrating her latest victory in a long string of career successes despite having a fixed schedule. Her research was featured prominently on the cover of Science magazine. Becoming less accessible, the discussion about shallow work would be incomplete without considering emails. This purely shallow activity always knows how to grab the attention of most intellectual workers, as it brings a range of distractions you are familiar with. The habit of checking emails everywhere has become so ingrained that we are gradually forgetting about our lives outside of work. As John Freeman warned in his 2009 book The Tyranny of Email, with the rise of this technology, we are gradually eroding the ability to explain, carefully, precisely, why it is wrong to complain, resist, or redesign our working days to make them more manageable. Email seems like a fait accompli. Resistance seems futile. This strategy counters that fatalism. Just because you can't entirely avoid this tool doesn't mean you have to helplessly watch it take over your mental life. In the following sections, I will describe 3 tips that help you regain control over how this technology accesses your time and attention, allowing you to maintain autonomy, as Freeman has pointed out. Resistance is not futile. You have more control over this electronic communication tool than you might think. Tip 1. Make email senders work harder. Anyone can reach out to nonfiction authors. They often provide an email address on their author website along with an invitation to send them any requests or proposals that the readers may have. Many even see this response as a necessary commitment to the often elusive but highly valued activity of community building. But here's the issue: I don't do that. If you visit the contact section of my website, you won't find a general-purpose email address. Instead, I list different individuals you can contact for specific purposes. For example, a literary agent for copyright inquiries or a speaker representative for speaking requests. If you want to contact me, I provide a special purpose email address with conditions and a very low likelihood of me responding. If you have a proposal, opportunity, or recommendation that could make my life more interesting, please email me at interesting@calnewport.com. For the reasons mentioned, I will only respond to proposals that align with my schedule and interests. I call this method the sender filter, as I ask the mail department to filter first before reaching out to me. This filter helps me significantly reduce the time spent checking my inbox. Before I started using the sender filter, I had posted a general-purpose email address on the website. Unsurprisingly, I would often receive long emails asking for advice on student or career-related questions, often quite complex. I wanted to help these individuals, but there were just too many requests. The senders didn't spend much time composing the emails, but I spent considerable time writing responses. The sender filter helps me eliminate most of these communications, thereby drastically reducing my incoming mail volume. To effectively help readers, I now redirect this energy toward the tasks I carefully choose to maximize my impact. For example, instead of letting any student from around the world send questions, I now focus on a small group of easily reachable student groups and provide more effective mentoring. Another benefit of the sender filter is that it resets the expectation threshold. The most important line in the description above is, "I will only respond to proposals that align with my schedule and interests." While small, this can make a significant difference in how readers perceive the importance of the messages they send me. The social convention around email is that unless you're famous, if someone sends you something, you owe them a reply. Therefore, for most people, a full inbox equates to a huge obligation. Instead, reset the reader's expectations by acknowledging that you may not reply, and suddenly the experience is transformed. Your inbox becomes a collection of opportunities that you can scroll through when you have spare time, identifying the emails that require attention. But unread messages no longer carry the obligation of a response. If you want, you can ignore them all without any repercussions. Psychologically, this can make you feel lighter. When I first started using the sender filter, I was worried that my actions might seem a bit arrogant, as if my time was more valuable than the time of my readers, and this would upset people. But no one noticed this concern. Most people easily accept that you have the right to control the flow of your own communications because they, too, want to enjoy this right. More importantly, everyone appreciates clarity. Most people are fine with not receiving a reply if they don't expect one. Generally, people with some fame, such as authors, often overestimate how much others really care about receiving a reply to their message. Here is the English translation for your text. In some cases, resetting expectations can even help you gain more trust when responding. For example, an editor from an online publication once sent me an article and assumed that I would not reply. When I did respond, she was very surprised. Here is a summary of her feedback. When I emailed Cal to ask if he'd like to contribute to our publication, I set my own expectations. I didn't expect him to want to post anything on blogs through the sender filter, so I wasn't bothered if I didn't get a reply. But then, when I received his response, I was very touched. My sender filter is just one example of this broader strategy. Consider the case of Clay Herbert, a mentor and expert in running community funding campaigns for tech startups, a field that attracts many readers hoping to get a few useful tips. An article on Forbes.com about the sender filter explained, "At one point, the number of contacts exceeded Herbert's capacity, so he created filters to assign tasks to those seeking help. While starting with a similar motivation as mine, Herbert's filters eventually took a different form. To contact him, you must first check the FAQ, frequently asked questions, to ensure your question hasn't already been answered, which is the case for many of the messages Herbert has to handle before setting up the filter. If you pass this stage, you are required to fill out a survey to assess how relevant your question is to his expertise. For those who pass this stage, Herbert charges a small fee that you must pay before reaching out to him. This fee is not for profit but is intended to ensure that the people contacting him are serious about receiving and acting on advice. Herbert's filter still allows him to help people and receive interesting opportunities, but it also restricts access to him in a way that allows him to handle and respond effectively. Another example is Antonio Centeno, the operator of the popular blog Real Man Style. Centeno's sender filter involves a two-step process. If you have a question, he directs you to a public location to post it. Centeno believes it's a waste of time to answer the same question repeatedly in private conversations. If you pass this stage, you are asked to commit to 3 things by checking the boxes. I will not ask Antonio a style-related question that I could have found the answer to on Google in 10 minutes. I will not send Antonio spam with a generic request to promote my unrelated business. I will do a good deed for a random stranger if Antonio responds within 23 hours. The message box where you can enter your question doesn't appear on the contact page until you've checked all 3 commitments. In short, while the technologies behind email may have changed, the social conventions governing how we apply these technologies remain underdeveloped. The concept that every message, regardless of purpose or sender, is sent to the same inbox and deserves a timely response is so ineffective that it borders on absurdity. The sender filter is a small but effective step towards a better state and a timely idea, at least for the growing number of entrepreneurs and freelancers who often receive many contact requests and need to limit people's access to them. I also hope that similar rules will become common for internal communications in large organizations, but for the reasons mentioned in Chapter 2, we are far from that reality. If you belong to this group, consider using a sender filter as a way to regain some control over your time and attention. Tip 2. Provide more content when sending or responding to emails. Consider the following typical emails. Email 1. It was great meeting you last week. I'd like to follow up on some things we discussed. How about a coffee? Email 2. We should follow up on the research issue we discussed in our last meeting. Can you remind me where we left off? Email 3. I've outlined the paper we discussed the other day. It's attached below. What do you think about the issue? These 3 examples are probably very familiar to most intellectual workers because they represent the type of messages that crowd their inboxes. They are also a goldmine of potential productivity. How you respond to them can significantly affect the amount of time and attention you devote to the ongoing conversation. In particular, emails with open-ended questions like these prevent the recipient from temporarily clearing them out of their inbox. In the moment, a quick response might give you a sense of relief as you push the responsibility back to the sender by replying to the message. However, this release feeling doesn't last long because the responsibility will be pushed back and forth again, continuing to invade your time and attention. Therefore, in my view, the best strategy for dealing with such questions is to pause before responding and take time to answer the central prompt. What is the project mentioned in the message, and what is the most effective process to ensure this project gets completed? Once you can answer this question yourself, replace a quick response with a more comprehensive one that outlines the process you've determined, indicates where you are in the process, and highlights the next step. I call this the process-centered approach to email, which can minimize both the number of emails you receive and the mental distractions they create. To explain this process further and understand why it works, consider the following process-centered responses to the earlier email examples. Response to email 1. I'd love to grab coffee. Let's meet at the Starbucks on campus. I've listed 2 days I'm free next week, with 3 time slots on each. If one of these works for you, let me know and I'll schedule the meeting. Otherwise, give me a call at the number below, and we'll find a time that works. Response to email 2. You're right, we should follow up on this issue. Here's my proposal. Send me an email with everything you remember from our discussion at any point in the next week. Once I receive it, I'll set up a shared folder for the project and add a document summarizing what you send along with my recollections of our conversation. In the document, I'll highlight 2 or 3 next steps we can be confident about. Then we can test these next steps over the next few weeks and follow up. I think we should schedule a monthly call to handle this. Below are some days and times when I'm available to talk. When you reply to this email, let me know which day and time works best for you, and we'll confirm the call time. I'm looking forward to discussing this further soon. Response to email 3. Thank you for sending over the draft. I'll review it and send back a marked-up copy with comments on Friday, the 10th. I'll make edits where necessary and include feedback on areas I think you should tweak for improvement. You'll polish it and send the final draft, so it's up to you. No need to reply or send me the edited version unless there's an issue. When drafting these sample responses, I start by identifying the project referenced in the message. Note that the term project here is used broadly. It could be a large and clear project like the progress of a research issue, example 2, but it could also be small logistical activities like scheduling a coffee meeting, example 1. Then, I spend a few minutes considering the process that will take us from the current state to the desired result with the minimum number of messages. The final step is to write a response that clearly outlines this process and indicates where we currently stand. These examples focus on responding to emails, but the same approach works just as well when writing emails from scratch. Here is the English translation of the text you provided. The process-centered approach to email can significantly reduce the impact of this technology on your time and attention for two reasons. First, it reduces the volume of emails you receive, sometimes significantly. A simple task like scheduling a coffee meeting can easily turn into a dozen or more messages over several days if you're not careful about how you respond. In turn, this type of email will help you minimize the time spent checking your inbox and reduce the mental energy required to figure out what to do. Second, using David Allen's terminology, when a project is initiated by an email you send or receive, it sits in your mind, it becomes something you have to deal with and needs to be resolved. This method helps close the loop as soon as it forms. By considering the entire process, adding any related commitments to your task list and calendar, and prompting your partner, your mind can be freed from the project. Less mental clutter means more mental resources for focused thinking. Emails that focus on the process may initially feel reluctant, since they require you to spend more time thinking about your response before composing the email. It may seem like you're spending more time on the email. But the important point to remember is that taking an extra 2 to 3 minutes now will save you many minutes later from unnecessary reading and responding to follow-up emails. Another issue is that process-focused messages can feel summarized and dry. Current social exchanges around emails increasingly conflict with our schedules. If you find yourself in this situation, I recommend adding a longer conversational opening. You could even separate the process-focused portion from the conversational opening with a dividing line or label it as "Proposed next steps," so that the dryness is more fitting in context. Ultimately, these small inconveniences provide their own value. By thinking more carefully about filtered messages at the point of entry and exit from your inbox, you will significantly reduce the negative impact of this technology on your ability to focus on what truly matters. Tip 3. Don't respond. As a graduate student at MIT, I had the opportunity to interact with renowned scholars. On these occasions, I noticed that many of them shared a rare and rather admirable email approach. Their default behavior upon receiving an email was not to respond. Over time, I learned the philosophy driving this behavior. When it comes to email, they believe that the responsibility of the sender is to convince the recipient that the message is worthy of a response. If you don't create a compelling situation and minimize the effort the recipient needs to make to respond, you won't get a reply. For example, the following email is unlikely to receive a response from many famous professors at MIT. Hello, Professor. I'd like to stop by your office to talk about topic X. Are you available? Responding to this message requires too much work. The phrase, "Are you available?" is too vague to warrant a quick response. Moreover, there is no effort to show why this conversation is worth the professor's time. Below is a version of the message that is more likely to get a reply. Hello, Professor. I'm working on a project related to topic X with my advisor, Professor Y. I'm emailing you to ask if it would be convenient for you if I stopped by your office during the last 15 minutes of office hours on Thursday to discuss the project in more detail and see if it might complement your current work. Unlike the first message, this one provides a clear situation explaining why the meeting is necessary and minimizes the effort required from the recipient to respond. To help you do this, try applying the 3 rules below to classify which emails deserve a response and which ones do not. Classifying professional emails. Do not respond to an email if it falls into any of the following categories. Asterisk it is vague, unclear, or difficult to respond to reasonably. Asterisk it is not a question or request you are interested in. Asterisk a response is optional or doesn't matter. There are always exceptions. For example, if the CEO of your company sends you a vague email about a project you aren't interested in, you will need to reply. But when considering these exceptions, this approach encourages you to be more decisive about whether you should reply or not. At first, this technique may make you uncomfortable because it forces you to break a standard convention of email communication, which assumes that once you receive an email, you should reply, regardless of its relevance or appropriateness. Some negative consequences are inevitable if you use this method. At the very least, some people might feel confused or awkward, especially if they've never seen the standard email practices questioned or ignored. Here's the thing, that's perfectly fine. Author Tim Ferriss once wrote, "Get in the habit of letting small bad things happen. Otherwise, you'll never find time for the big, life-changing things." The professors at MIT discovered that you should feel somewhat reassured when you realize that people will quickly adjust their expectations according to the specific details of your communication habits. The fact that you don't respond to their hasty messages is probably not as big a deal in their lives as you might think. Once you overcome the discomfort caused by this approach, you'll begin to experience the rewards it offers. When discussing solutions to email overload, two prominent viewpoints arise. Some believe that sending emails creates more emails, while others argue that handling vague, unclear, or irrelevant emails is the primary source of pressure. The approach suggested here to resolve both of these issues is to send fewer emails and ignore those that are not easy to handle. By doing so, you'll significantly reduce the time and attention you spend managing your inbox. Conclusion. The story of the founding of Microsoft has been told so many times that it has become legendary. In the winter of 1974, Bill Gates, a Harvard student, saw Altair, the world's first personal computer, on the cover of Popular Electronics magazine. Gates recognized the opportunity to design software for this machine, so he stopped all of his ongoing work and, with the help of Paul Allen and Monty Davidoff, spent 8 consecutive weeks hacking a version of the basic programming language for Altair. This story is often cited as an example of Gates' deep vision and boldness, but recent interviews have revealed another characteristic that played an equally important role in the fairy tale ending: Gates' extraordinary ability to focus deeply. As Walter Isaacson explained in a 2013 article for the Harvard Gazette, Gates worked at an intense pace for 2 months, often dozing off at his keyboard while typing a line of code. He would then sleep for 1 or 2 hours, wake up, and continue where he left off, an ability that Paul Allen was always impressed by and described as an extraordinary feat of focus. In his book The Innovators, Isaacson summarized Gates' unique tendency toward deep focus as follows. What set Gates apart from Allen was his focus. Allen's mind was always bouncing between ideas and passions, whereas Gates had the ability to observe every aspect. Now, in this story of Gates' extreme focus, I will present my strongest argument for deep work. In the chaos of the rapidly developing information age, we can easily fall into dialectical objections. Some people are bothered by the sight of others glued to their phones, letting the days slip by in mindless indifference, while tech enthusiasts may nostalgically lament Luddism and boredom, believing that enhanced connectivity is the foundation of an idealized future. Marshall McLuhan once declared, "The medium is the message," but today's discourse about these topics seems to imply that ethics is the medium. As emphasized in the introduction of this book, I'm not concerned with this debate. Committing to deep work is not a moral stance nor a philosophical declaration. Rather, it is the practical recognition that the ability to concentrate is a skill that helps individuals accomplish valuable things. In other words, deep work matters not because distraction is bad, but because it helped Bill Gates launch an entire industry worth billions of dollars in less than 6 months. This is also the lesson that I've found myself learning repeatedly in my own career. I've been passionate about deep work for over a decade, but even I'm still amazed at its power. During graduate school, when I first learned about and began prioritizing this skill, deep work allowed me to publish a few peer-reviewed papers each year, an impressive rate for a graduate student, despite rarely working more than 5 days a week or having to work weekends, which is quite rare among my colleagues. However, as I was about to become a professor, I started to worry. As a senior PhD student, I could manage my time freely, organizing most of my day as I wished. I knew that I would lose this advantage in the next stage of my career, and I wasn't confident I could still make deep work fit into a busier schedule and maintain my productivity. Rather than continuing to worry, I decided to do something about it. I made a plan to enhance my ability to focus on deep work. These efforts to train myself occurred during my last 2 years at MIT, when I was a senior PhD student striving to become a professor. My main strategy was to introduce hypothetical constraints into my schedule to better estimate the limited free time I expected once I became a professor. Besides the rule of no work at night, I started taking longer lunch breaks to go for a run and then return home to eat. I also signed a contract to write my 4th book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, during this period, a project that, of course, would soon demand more of my time. To compensate for these new constraints, I worked on developing my ability to do deep work. Among other techniques, I began to be more careful about carving out blocks of deep work time and protecting them from encroachment. I also developed the habit of reflective thinking during long walks each week, which was, in fact, a productivity booster for me, and I always sought out locations that helped me avoid distractions, which were conducive to focus. For example, in the summer, I often worked under the dome of the Barker Engineering Library, a quiet, comfortable spot that was usually very crowded during the school year. In the winter, I sought out lesser-known locations to find solitude and often preferred the smaller, quieter Lewis Music Library. At that time, I even bought a $50 laptop with an advanced modular network to handle mathematical proofs, because I believed that the cost would create more mental friction, which would help me focus better. I was truly amazed at how much this pushed me to focus deeply on my work. After taking on the role of Professor of Computer Science at Georgetown University in the fall of 2011, I had more responsibilities than ever before. But I had been trained for this moment. Not only did I manage to maintain my research productivity, but I was also able to improve it. While I had previously maintained a rate of 2 quality papers per year since my graduate student days, I now found myself averaging 4 papers per year, despite taking on more responsibilities as a professor. While this was impressive, I soon realized that I had not yet reached the limit of what deep work could produce. I came to this realization in my 3rd year as a professor. During the 3rd year at Georgetown, from the fall of 2013 to the summer of 2014, I returned to my deep work habits, actively seeking opportunities for improvement. The reason for this is the book you're reading. Most of it was written during this period. Writing a manuscript of around 70,000 words, of course, introduced an unexpected new constraint on my already busy schedule, while I still wanted to ensure my academic research productivity remained high. Another reason was the upcoming research process. I had 1 more year to go, equivalent to 2 more publications before submitting my dissertation. In other words, this was the time to make a statement about my abilities, especially since my wife and I planned to have our 2nd child in the final year of my PhD program. The final reason was more personal, and admittedly, a sensitive one. I had applied for and been denied a grant that many of my colleagues had received. I was deeply disappointed and embarrassed, so I decided that instead of complaining. In Part 1, I quoted the writer Winifred Gallagher's statement, "I will live a focused life, because that is the best way to live." I agree with his assessment. Bill Gates does too. And I hope that now, as you prepare to close this book, you agree with it as well.